Well, yeah.
Hey, I'll introduce this. So I'm Mike Rizzatello. I'm the College Place City administrator. And what the public briefing is today is on tax increment finance. And so this is a relatively new economic development tool, was adopted roughly 2 years ago by the state of Washington, and really to further economic development projects. Every other state except Washington was utilizing this, so it really put us at a competitive disadvantage. And now that we're able to do this, each city in jurisdiction, including county and ports, can do up to 2 of these tax increment financing districts. At this moment, we are only considering one, and that's to help further along the investment in the southwest area of our community, as well as downtown, which has got some significant infrastructure gaps. So now to learn more about the ins and outs of tax increment financing, I'll turn it over to Bob Stowe. Bob.
Thank you, Michael.
Hold on just a sec, Bob. Just so the video is clear, I'm Marie Colwell, city attorney.
Brian Carlton, finance director.
Okay, now the floor is yours,
Sorry.
Bob. No,
Oh, great. Thank you. So my name is Bob Stowe, Stowe Development and Strategies, and I'm the lead consultant for the City of College Place on the tax increment financing program. And my colleague, Morgan Shook, I'm not sure if Morgan's on the line today, but he's with Eco Northwest, and has performed a lot of the calculations that were necessary to project the TIP revenues. And so what I'm going to be describing today is the tax increment financing program, really focusing mostly on the project analysis, which was required to be submitted to the state. Any jurisdiction that wants to do a tax increment financing program must submit analysis to the state. The state then reviews that analysis and then provides recommendations back to the city council. But this is the basic model associated with tax increment financing, whether it exists in Washington state or any number of states across the country. The difference in Washington state's law is that it was meant to be impact neutral to all the various taxing districts. In other words, all the taxing districts that are participating in the tax increment financing program will continue to receive the same revenue that they had been relying upon in previous years. This is the existing tax base shown on this slide. And it's the incremental taxes that would go to the jurisdiction that forms the tax increment area to help pay for the infrastructure that caused the development in the first place. And so excluded from the tax increment financing calculations are any property tax associated with school districts or any voter approved levies. And we'll talk more about that in a moment, about how that really is impact neutral and doesn't cause any harm to the existing taxing districts. So a quick overview, the city administrator had mentioned, this is a powerful tool for economic development. It's available to 3 different entities right now: cities, counties, and ports. It's designed for a specific project site rather than you simply form a tax increment area and then hope development will occur, because the jurisdiction who forms that TIA and then issues any debt is going to be responsible for that debt regardless if development materializes or not. Every tax increment area has a foundational element of a but for the investment or but for the public improvements, the development would not occur. And so we've looked at that but for analysis as part of the College Place project and believe that there's a strong nexus between the infrastructure improvements and the development that would occur. And of course, when the development happens, it results in new AV, public benefits, construction of the desired development, and then some short and long-term jobs associated with employment, as well as construction jobs that occur from the development. And it's the taxes from that development that are used to pay for the infrastructure needed by the development. And so there's no impact on individual property tax holders. And although it's called tax increment financing, it's not a new tax. It's simply utilizing the existing property tax levy and carving a portion of that out to apply to the tax increment area, and then the taxes are redistributed back to the city. Some important elements, the city county report must first adopt an ordinance, and that ordinance has to include the boundary for the tax increment area, whether or not the public improvements are going to be financed, and then whether or not bonds would be issued. City administrator mentioned that only 2 increment areas can be created at any one time. They cannot overlap, and they also cannot exceed more than $200 million of assessed valuation at the time that the jurisdiction adopts the ordinance, or 20% of the assessed valuation of the sponsoring jurisdiction, whichever is less. The city cannot add any improvements or change the boundary after the ordinance is adopted. And also must include a deadline, and that's generally within 5 years after the ordinance is adopted that you have to initiate the public improvements, unless you can show cause for why there needs to be a delay. The local government may only use the TIF revenues for the period of time that are necessary to support its debt service. So if you have a 20-year bond, that tax increment area will expire at the conclusion of that bond and will expire. Also, if the tax increment area is capable of generating $50 million, but the jurisdiction only needs 10 million, it can only receive $10 million from that increment area. The remaining 40 million would be redistributed amongst all the various taxing districts. And in no case can the tax increment area exist longer than a 25-year period. And so these are the 4 infrastructure improvements that the City of College Place has identified, which would be necessary to stimulate and allow for the desired development. Those include the largest of which, and these are costs that are just a portion of the full project cost. Other sources of funds that are being relied upon by the city. Sometimes developers are submitting those. The city may have grants or other sources of funds that it's putting towards these, but these are just the amounts that the tax increment area would support. So Majornia Road, the cost of 4.3 million, East-West Road, a cost of almost 2 million, signalization of College Avenue and East-West Road, 550,000, and then some downtown parking lots that will support the retail community at 1.4 million. So a total of just over $8 million of TIF contributions. And there's more detail in terms of what the project is intended to support and do within the project analysis, and the city staff can also probably elaborate more on those projects. This is the tax increment area that's proposed. It results in 259 acres of property and also has an AB at the end of 2022 at $43 million. So well below the $200 million threshold, or the 20% of the city's total AB threshold. This is a property tax levy that's anticipated, at least from the 2022 taxes, or 2022 levy rate of 4.17. Excluded from that, the total levy rate is over $11 per 1,000 of assessed valuation, but once you exclude the state schools of $2.80, and then the $4.67 of other levies, you're left with $4.17 that gets applied to the tax increment area. We looked at the types of development that would likely occur if the infrastructure improvements were to be constructed and supported by TIF. And we've developed these sort of 6 areas, each with the different phases, the valuation of what the market evaluation might be for those development phases, the number of units or square feet if it's commercial property, when those developments might start, and then the build out or the absorption level in terms of the marketplace, so when properties would be fully developed. And so when we calculate all of that and look at how these might occur over the next several years, this is our baseline development. We're projecting over $414 million of private investment that could occur as a result of the public infrastructure investments. And this is what's driving the TIF revenues. This is largely the private development within most of the tax increment area that would be supporting the development. And you can see on this map, we show, at least as in draft form, the site plan, a number of single family units, a number of multifamily units, some senior housing units, potentially some commercial units on this parcel. And so this is a site plan that's currently, involves two different property owners. both of which would likely coordinate with their development as they move forward. This is the city's debt capacity. If it were to issue all the $8 million in 2023, they would have almost $4 million remaining in non-voted debt capacity, meaning that it could issue additional debt if it chose to in that year of up to $4 million after after the TIF improvements are financed. And so we also looked at some other scenarios, development programs associated with the development. And the baseline represents the full development, likely the most aggressive type of development. So we call these other two just simply alternative 1, alternative 2. And alternative 1 extends the build out years for all development by twice the amount of time. So if something was going to take 4 years to develop now, we're projecting it's going to take 8 years to fully be developed. And then we reduce a single family home valuation. If a home was going to cost $500,000 as projected, then that was going to be reduced by 20% in order to drive the TIF revenues. We looked at alternative 2, which did the same thing. Again, extended the build out year by twice the amount, reduced the single family home value, in this case, by 30% rather than 20. And then we reduced the senior housing by 50% and only included a hotel development on what's termed as the McKernan parcel. And these are the revenues that were generated from those various scenarios. The baseline, $17 million would be possible from that type of development over a 25-year period. The same 25-year period, alternative 1 would generate just over almost $14 million, and alternative 2 would generate $9.9 million. And that's based on a discount rate of 4.5%, trying to mirror what the city's interest rate might be for issuance of a bond to support the public improvements. And then if we looked at a 5% interest rate, the city would be able to support 15.8 million down to 9.1 million in public improvements. Additionally, there's taxes that come along with beyond property taxes that will be generated from the development. Beyond that, that would be supported by TIF. And most of these are from construction sales tax, in which you'd look at almost $15 million over a 25-year period, and most of that coming up front to support additional capital improvements or additional operational expenses. And so those total between the baseline of 21.6 million to 6.9 million in alternative 2. Additionally, new jobs get created. And again, the bulk of these jobs would be from one-time construction activities, between 770 construction jobs to over 1,100 jobs under the baseline. And then ongoing employment, just simply the ongoing employment that would exist in the commercial businesses within the site plan itself or within the TIA itself, between 40 and 230 jobs. We looked at what would be the AB growth, anticipated growth without any of the public improvements, and then of course what it would be with alternative 1 and 2. And you can see that in all cases with no public improvements or no TIF, the AB is very low, remains from 37 million. These are 5-year increments. And then at 2048, you have a total of $168 million in comparison to the baseline, which is almost close to $1 billion of development. If you looked at just a level debt service, excuse me, a level debt service of $8 million and spread that over the term, the 25-year period, that would calculate to about $629,000 annually in debt service payments. A lot of information on this slide, but it shows the red numbers are going to indicate where you have a deficit that would occur on any of the different scenarios. So under the baseline, you have several years all the way out to 2033 in which there'd still be a gap that you'd have to fill with some interim financing until the development stabilized and was generating enough revenue so you could pay yourself back. And of course, those gaps lengthen and more years would be required to gain revenue before you start paying yourself back under alternative 1 and alternative 2. So this is just taking another look at what if you had a split debt rather than issuing the full 8 million up front. If you issued 4.3 million in 2024, primarily for the Majorna Road, and then the rest of the improvements, 3.8 million by 2028, it shows you'd have 7 years of deficits that you'd have to cover on an interim basis. And that drops it down to 1.5 million versus the not having that split debt. And so that's the interim financing that the city would need to cover under that scenario. If you did full debt, didn't have a split, but had interest only for 5 years, you'd still have 7 years of deficits. And then you drop that $2.7 million again, sort of under the full scenario of 8 million down to 1.7 million. We also looked at what if you applied the additional taxes and then also did interest only under the debt scenario. You'd be able to drop your deficits down to 4 years. We'd have to cover, the city would have to cover those debt service payments for a total of 1.5 million. And the last scenario we ran was a split debt, additional taxes and interest only. In this case, you see, we didn't have any surplus deficits to actually have to cover. In this scenario, you'd be able to fully cover the expenses associated with the debt service. And so we ran these various scenarios just to provide some flexibility and some analysis. You'll want to do something very similar before the city would issue any debt to make sure that it's capable of paying its debt service under based on whatever the private development conditions are at the time. And I'll finish up with just the timeline. We have submitted the draft project analysis to the state Office of State Treasurer. We expect a response from them this week, in which we'll be able to finalize that. This is the first of 2 public briefings. The city's anticipated that following the public briefings, following the recommendations from the state, that it'll consider a tax increment area ordinance adoption, and that'll occur in May. And then if the council were to adopt that, there likely would be some development agreements that would follow between the city and the key developers. Certainly the city will want to evaluate the market readiness before issuing any debt. Debt could potentially be issued as early as 2024, and then simply monitoring the development. And if there's any split debt issuance, to continue to monitor the market to determine when the best case scenario would be for the city to issue that second portion of the debt. And with that, I'll take any questions or comments from anyone in the room today or online.
Anyone in the attendees list, if you'd like to make a comment, please raise your hand.
Hey, well, before we'll close out, I'll just elaborate on what this is going for here. So there's 4 projects entailed in this proposal, and this is not for the totality of the costs of each. This essentially is match money and make a full project. So Southwest Majorna Road, that's city owned, and that, as well as the McCarran and Christensen parcels, were brought into city limits a little over 5 years ago. So for that project right now, we are currently under engineering and right-of-way acquisition, which is primarily financed by a metropolitan planning organization, a state grant for that. And then for the construction phases, we're going to be getting a metropolitan planning organization state grant for $750,000. Representative Kathy McMorris Rogers is actually sponsoring a congressionally directed spending request for $2.5 million on top of that. And then we'll have requests for State Transportation Improvement Board for the remainder. So that coupled with the TIF money will finance Majanier, and that will basically include that road being upgraded to where it'll have sidewalks, bike lanes, larger travel lanes, and the appropriate safety features. The east-west road, that will be primarily financed by a developer. There is some cost to get across the first property owner. We do have that right of way secured. That east-west road is very important, because at the far western extent of that development site, the College Place Public School District has acquired land for a future intermediate school. So there needs to be appropriate access to that site and to development as a whole. Likewise, given where that east-west road would go, that's right adjacent to Sager Middle School and College Place High School. So there has to be some intersection improvements there. And a lot of this is being matched with developer funds or state grants. And then also to cover ourselves, we are also in the midst of negotiating a developer agreement with the Lakeside Group that has acquired the Craig Christensen parcel. So that's going in. And then for the fourth project, that project entails some site acquisition and construction of shared public parking lots. That has been a need for some time because quite a few property and business owners on College Avenues that have expressed frustration at the lack of parking over there. And as it stands, we require parking for new development, and that has turned away quite a bit of development due to the narrow parcels. There are some vacant properties in the middle of our blocks and things like that. So this would be helped to essentially establish public parking lots, about 2 of them, through the College Avenue corridor. That way that parking requirement can be waived, and that will allow for further investment. So in a nutshell, that provides the overview. Really, we're using this as a local match to get other funds, both from state, federal sources and developers, to make this happen. So that's the overview. Hey, well, if there are no questions, we will be having another public briefing of this in a couple weeks, and we do have a webpage for this on cpwa.us, and we'll put out further information as it becomes available. The timeline we're on for this, as you saw, is that the TIF ordinance really needs to be adopted by council by the late May. That does not in fact tie to a direct debt issuance. That just merely creates the ability to have the tax increment financing district. And then as we're assessing that market readiness and making sure everything is secure, that's when council can make their informed decision as to the financing, because you can do the bonds, or you can also do pay as you go. So there's many ways to go about this. So we will convey those as they become available. Okay. There's no other comments. Have a good morning, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
Yeah.